thank you. Thank you for coming. It's always a privilege to be able to share. One thing I wanted to clarify, because of the streaming in the video, do I need to stand like I'm locked right here? Is that correct? Can I move around a little bit? Is that okay? That's okay, just a little bit. Don't go too far. All right, I will try not to go too far. I'll stay on the stage. Oh, man. Yes, so thank you for having me. Yes, I am a PhD biochemist. That is my background, mostly computational biology. And this has nothing to do with either one of those subjects. My interest has shifted over the years. It's kind of shifted back to an obsession I had as a very young science student, and that is hominin fossils. I do encourage you, check out our exhibit back there. It's brand new this weekend. We just put the finishing touches on it on Monday, and this is the first time I've actually seen it all set up in one place, so check that out. Those are probably the closest you can get to the real bones anywhere. Those are all three-dimensional prints based on high-resolution scans of original fossils. And you can see Australopithecus there and Neanderthal as well. And there's stuff there that will tell you all about what that means. So I'm pretty excited about that. I don't know that my voice is communicating that, but I am very excited about that. I wish I had had that opportunity when I was young, but then maybe I'm weird that way. I don't know. Maybe you're thinking, why do you have skeletons in church? Well, yeah, I know. It's a little odd. Yeah, so let me get started here. Okay, I'm going to do this, and then you just push the slide forward. How about that? That'll be my slide moving gesture. There you go. All right, here we go. All right, it's a good time. So I usually start this talk by quoting from this guy, and he's writing about 10 years after Origin of Species was published, 1869 it is. They knew about the first Neanderthal by this point, and that's pretty much it. And he says, it is strange, if transmutation be a fact, that during the whole historic period, not the slightest approximation to the missing link has ever been noticed. All right. And the situation today is somewhat different. Over the past, 100 and whatever it's been, 140, 150 years, there's been a steady stream of fossil discoveries that have been put forward as being sort of the irrefutable proof that humans evolved from apes. Not living apes, not chimpanzees and gorillas, but from animals that you would identify, you would recognize as an ape. And yeah, so the fossils began, the discoveries began shortly before Origin was published, with the realization that the first Neanderthal Feldover 1 was something different than us. It was not the same as a Homo sapiens, a modern human being. And it proceeded through that. That actually engendered quite a debate that was resolved in the 1880s with the discovery of additional Neanderthals in Europe, in Belgium, and so on and so forth. And the march, once the genie was out of the bottle, pretty much everybody decided we got to go find all these hominin fossils. And so in South Africa, we had the discoveries of Australopithecus, which literally means southern ape. In China, famous Peking man fossils, which we now know as Homo erectus. And in my lifetime, when I was in high school, they discovered a beautiful Homo erectus skeleton in Africa called Neriacotomy boy. Most recently, we've had reports of new things from caves in South Africa that are really shocking and surprising in ways that we never really anticipated before. And so now we've gone from having, these quotes of people saying there's no missing link to having dozens of these fossils that have been put forward as genuine missing links. This is a real missing link. And it's made the more, relevant, the more compelling, because evolutionists publish these sorts of trees like this, where they're setting out the relationships of these fossils, and they say, look, you can arrange them in a particular order according to their anatomical similarity to each other. And when you do that, those bars there, they represent the relative time span. So on the axis there, on the right, shows you conventional radiometric millions of years. And so these fossils they go all the way back to prior to 5 million years ago. And yeah, when you line them up and you sort of root them with a chimpanzee, you get this sense that, yeah, there is this weird progression of fossils that become more and more human. The yellow ones are from the genus Homo, which is our genus. And as you move from right to left, you become less like a chimpanzee, more like a modern human. And this tree really sort of makes you think, wow, there must be something to this evolution story if this is how it all lines up. It makes sense of the radiometric dating. The scientists seem very convinced. What more is there to say? And the responses that we get from various creationists that I've seen, and frankly, other Christians, anybody, we get lots of different responses. Some just say that, science is the source of truth, and the Bible is obviously bogus. Those would be the non-believers, or the people who are on their way to becoming non-believers. We have those who would say, well, it's just a metaphor, right? The creation stories in Genesis 1 through 11, they're just stories. They're like parables. They're like fables that tell us important theological truths, but you're not supposed to take details from them as if they're giving you a recipe of how actually things happen. That would be wrong. Then we have the opposite end of things, where people will tell you very firmly that these fossils are made up, they're fake, they're all fake. And if you go back there, you might say, well, these are all made of plastic, so they're clearly not real fossils. True enough, that's right, they are made of plastic. That's right, they are fake. They're not, I don't think they're quite in the same categories of fraud, but they're not real fossils, true. And then you have folks who will tell you that it's easy. It's easy to tell the difference between what is really human and what is really an ape. And maybe a handful of characteristics that you can learn yourself at home, and then you can just go to any museum and you don't really have to think about it. You don't even have to read the sign. You can just say, this is human and that is not human. And then you have those who will still insist that the missing link is still missing, which I find really fascinating when, you've got dozens of these fossils and everybody is telling you that there's this clear transition, and then I'm not sure how we maintain the missing link still being missing. And the key here, then, is this particular description in Genesis where God comes down and forms man from the dust of the ground, breathes into his life, breathes into his nostrils the breath of life, and man becomes a living soul. Notice the phrasing there, I think, is really important. Living soul, nefesh chaya in Hebrew, that is not a phrase that is used uniquely of human beings. Animals in Genesis 1 are described as nefesh chaya. Living soul is just a term for a living being. So when God makes man, he brings life, and then man becomes a living being. According to the evolution story, it's the opposite, right? God evolves these living beings and then endows them with something to allow them to become human. So there's already a bit of a clash here, right? And of course, in Genesis 1, as we saw earlier this evening, I'm not going to belabor this too much, but we have this notion of image of God. And that is the distinguishing mark of humanity. And it's not just a thing that humans have. When you read through Genesis 1, you read, when God creates plants, he creates them after their kind. When God creates the swimming things in the sea and the flying things in the air, he creates them after their kind. When God creates the creepers and the beasts of the field and the wild animals, he creates them after their kind. And when it comes to humanity, God says, let us make man in our image. The contrast is striking. Whatever the kind is, whatever after its kind means, it's pretty obviously functioning as a direct contrast to the way God makes people. We are not just after a kind. We are the image of God. It is there to set us apart from the animals in some way. Okay, so this leads to a bunch of thorny questions. And I've got to revise this whole section here. So obviously, what do you mean by human? There is a certain biological component to it. For me, this is going to involve natural generation from Adam and Eve. So that would define all the future generations of human. Obviously, that's not good enough to define the humanity of Adam and Eve, because they're made by God. So it's an operational description of what human is. And then, of course, we have to understand what we mean by the image of God. And again, I don't want to belabor this too much. There's lots of discussion about this. And, excuse me, a lot of discussion about this in the light of human evolution. And the big push nowadays is for theistic evolutionists to try to figure out, all right, well, what is the image of God? And how does it fit in with evolution? So when you go to Google Scholar or whatever, and you look up image of God, and you look at the most recent articles, they're all going to be articles written by individuals from this evolutionary perspective. And they're going to talk about things like, well, maybe God found some apes somewhere, gave them the image, and that tribe became human. Maybe the image of God applies to more things than just humanity, which is totally unbiblical. Maybe the image of God involves something that has nothing to do with biology at all, which I think, again, is rather untenable. Yeah, so, excuse me, let's just roll through these lines here. There's one, there's another one, there's another one. There's another one. All right, that's good enough. Let's stop right there. So again, I don't want to go over all this stuff about the image of God again, but I do want to ponder for a moment here this notion of the physicality, the physical dimension of the image of God. It's a tricky business. I've been challenged just recently, just in the past month, about this notion of the image of God as having a physical component. This evening, as I was listening to Dr. Wilson speak, I was thinking, yes, here we go again, the image of God having a physical component. And it's true. I am convinced now, after this past month, there must be physical parts to the image of God. It's inconceivable that there couldn't be. One of the big reasons, the tselem, the notion of the image as an analogy to the statue of the ruler that the ruler puts in his distant parts of his empire, right? This is one way that the ancient readers would read this passage, and they would go, oh yeah, I know what that is. I know what a tselem is, because they would think of that, right? But that is a physical tselem is a physical representation. So part of us being the image of God is that we are physical representations of God. It is necessary that be so. So it is necessary then I get it now. It is necessary then that there must be a physical component to our imageness, whatever image is. The tricky business, I think, is when I try to say, okay, well, this is the image of God, right? It's not a piece of the skeleton. Because you could imagine, imagine a person who has had her arm amputated, right? Is she no longer the image of God? Is she less of an image of God than somebody else? No, obviously not, but that she's lost a whole arm. Imagine someone who's had a stroke and now has suddenly found himself later in life having struggles with his mental capacities, right? The sorts of features, the intellectual capacity of humanity that we so often associate with the image has become impaired in this individual. But we would not say that this person is not the image of God anymore. That doesn't make any sense, right? So, and third point, we all recognize the differences among people today, right? Even the Bible talks about this. In Jesus, there is no Jew or Greek. There is no male or female. There is none. These categories that we have fade away in Jesus, right? And yet, at the same time, he never says there is no ape or human. There's clearly a difference here. There's a line that exists somehow, right? So even as I'm wrestling with this notion of there must be a physical component to the image of God, I'm still left thinking, I don't know how that works out in practice, right? Because I can think of people who lose these physical capacities and I think they're still the image of God. And I can think of our natural tendency to recognize differences between people are of less importance than our shared humanity and our shared image of God, right? It's okay, you have a different color of skin, you have a different height, you have a different weight, you have a different whatever, you're still the image of God. So that still leaves me with this question of, okay, so if I have the image of God, and let's just say this in sort of the best case scenario, I am going to exhibit characteristics that will allow me to be the image of God in a way that's good, right? I'm going to have intellectual capacities that will allow me to rule here in creation. And I may be completely inept at it. I may not be able to strike a fire with some flint to save my life. But I nevertheless have intellectual capacity. I could learn that skill, right? I may not be able to grow much in a garden. I may not be able to, I don't have the stomach to slaughter animals for food, but I could learn those attributes. I could dominate creation. So as I think about the things in the fossil record that we started talking about at the beginning of our discussion here, I think about, okay, what are the sorts of attributes that I would see in the fossil record that I could say, those sorts of things would be things I would think would exhibit the sort of mental powers and capacity that I would associate with a good depiction of the image of God. I think there are 6 of them, roughly, that I can think of. The first one there is the controlled use of fire. Animals hate fire. They run away from fire. Fire is scary. Only human beings have learned how to master the use of fire. We use it for light. We use it for heat. We use it for cooking. It is, on a drive in here, I was listening to an audio book on Neanderthals, because that's what I do. And the author was making the point, is that certain Neanderthal sites where you find evidence of hunting and evidence of stone tools, but no evidence of fire, could it be that they were just sort of trying to tough it out in their animal skins and tough out winter and survive that way, and the author said, no, that's probably not true. They're probably lighting their fires somewhere other than where they're eating and making their stone tools. And I think that's right. I think it's quite impossible to imagine human beings like Neanderthals surviving winter without having fire for heat. So fire is one of those things that I just think, this is not an animal that's doing this. These are human beings making fire. Sophisticated tools. I put sophisticated in quotes there because it's a tricky business. We now know of, goodness, multiple species of apes and monkeys that are capable of making tools that look like the simplest stone tools that we find in the fossil record. And those stone tools are basically, you take a rock and you knock into it and you cut off a little flake that has a sharp edge that you can use for cutting. That's the simplest stone tool. They're fossil record, they're associated with a number of different fossil forms, and we now know from observations in the wild of wild monkeys and wild apes that they can do it too. So I say, all right, well, at the same time, I don't see apes chipping out really sophisticated looking hand axes or arrowheads or anything like that. The kinds of sophisticated tools that you would associate with humanity, those are quite a bit different than just whacking two rocks together to make a sharp edge. So there's going to be a little fuzziness at the simplest end of the tools, but there's a certain level of sophistication where you think that's got to be human. Art or decoration. This is another thing, and again, this is a tricky business too, because of course you can show all manner of birds making really cool displays for their mating season, you know, trying to impress all the ladybirds with their artistic prowess, right? So we have to be careful about this, but at the same time, we don't see a lot of that in apes, and we certainly don't see apes manipulating their environment for aesthetic reasons. That's something that seems to be quite uniquely human. So if we find evidence in the fossil record of substances and materials that would be used for artistic purposes, then we're probably looking at something that's a little more on the human side than on the animal side. Another aspect is care for the wounded or the elderly. Again, another tricky one here, because even animals can survive some pretty shocking wounds. We had a three-legged cat when I was growing up who'd gotten into some sort of trap, lost one of his feet, and he survived it. On the other hand, there are certain individuals in the fossil record that are so wounded. It is really hard to imagine that person surviving at all without significant help. We'll talk about that here in a minute. Intentional burial, that's another definite human attribute. Whether it's involving some sort of grandiose idea of the afterlife, or whether it's just we need to get this body out of the camp because it's going to attract predators. Either way you go, somebody actually taking a body and putting it into the ground, digging a hole and putting it into the ground, or putting it into a cave somewhere, that's a pretty significant and complicated behavior. And then I have this last category that's sort of a catch-all: complex dispersal, complex exploration, complex behaviors of moving from one place to another. This might involve crossing open water, crossing open ocean, from a mainland to an island. It could involve deep cave exploration as well. Getting down deep into a cave involves having the desire to go exploring, and so forth. Those are human attributes. Now, the easiest example here that I can show you of this is Neanderthals. Neanderthals show all of these attributes, and they show them remarkably well, and they're quite beautiful. Tested evidence of fire in the fossil record. It's well attested enough now that we can see variations of we can see in a single site. At this part of the deposition, they're making fires. Here's a big section where they don't make any fires, and then they start making fires again. this is the level of detail we have for Neanderthal fire. We know Neanderthals were well able to utilize fire, and they knew what to do with it. And they cooked their food, too, for that matter. Tools, plenty of evidence for tools, not just stone tools, but we have evidence of bone and wood tools as well. So Neanderthals are using a variety of materials in their environment to do many different things. We also know that they were cooking birch bark in order to make tar that would stick two different materials together, where they could take the stone tool and stick it onto a stick with their birch tar, and then they could use that tool for something. We're not really sure what. We know that certain Neanderthals were making really tiny blades, and so the big speculation now is you can't do much with a tiny little blade that's about this big unless you attached it to something else, right? So it's got to be attached to something in order to work well. So we've got lots of evidence of really cool, sophisticated Neanderthal tools. And I will also mention some of their hand axes, some of their flint hand axes have worn scratches right in the middle. And then little black marks around those worn scratches. And it looks like chemical tests and so forth, they're making rocks, their flint to cause sparks. They're making their fires with their hand axes. So we've gotten to the level now where we can look at, oh, and another really great I just learned about. There's a Neanderthal where we found a sliver of wood in the dental calculus of his tooth. They were using toothpicks. So Neanderthals are really smart, and they're doing all sorts of really cool tool use, and it's really amazing. Art. Is there art for Neanderthals? Yes. This is maybe the most controversial. People aren't really comfortable with this, but I think art's art, and it's pretty clear. We have widespread use of ochre among Neanderthals. They're using ochre for coloration. We have evidence of, in southern Europe, they're using shells from the seashore for decoration. We have shells, matching shells from a bivalve, like a clam, where they've drilled right through them at the same spot. So the shell was closed, they drilled through it, and then there's wear around the edges of the hole, which indicates that it probably was threaded through something. So they're wearing these shells as decoration, presumably. We have evidence, multiple sites now, we found eagle talons, where the talon has been pulled off, and there's clear cut marks on them, and there's clear wear marks as well, where they have been wrapped up with something and worn. It's the only thing I can think of. They're wearing these things. So we also have carvings. We have a place called Brunikel Cave where they have arranged broken stalactites and stalagmites in a circle, and they have been burning things. It's not a hearth, but they've been burning something in this circle of stone underground. I don't know what it is, but it's obviously some sort of important Neanderthal ritual. So art, definitely. Care for wounded or elderly. Shenadar 1 is the classic example of this. Shenadar 1 suffered so many wounds in his life, it's astonishing that he survived. He was almost certainly deaf in one ear. He was almost certainly blind in one eye. He suffered a blow to the head that left him with these injuries. He suffered a blow to his arm that left him, broke his arm in multiple places, and his hand was eventually amputated, and it's healed over. And he also had a damage to his leg, so he was probably walking with a limp. So it's hard to imagine this fellow able to go out and, survive on his own if he was just an animal. He needed somebody to take care of him. Those wounds, I guarantee, would leave him quite bad for some. Intentional burial, we have multiple examples of these. I've listed a couple, La Chapelle, Usson, where we have recent excavations of this site have shown the difference in the original sediment in the site and the backfill from the grave. So we can see that somebody dug out an opening, put the body in, wrapped him up in a fetal position, laid him on his side, and then covered him over in dirt. And then Shanidar Z, another Neanderthal from the same cave in northern Iraq, as Shanidar 1, the wounded one. This one was found most recently, laid out nicely, and big stone under his head, presumably put there to like a pillow, right? So yeah, definite evidence for intentional burial. There's others. I'll talk tomorrow about Kibara 2, which exquisitely preserved skeleton from a cave in Israel. Also evidence of intentional burial there. And of course, the dispersal, we have Neanderthals living on islands that were probably not connected to the mainland at the time the Neanderthals got there. And we have Neanderthals, as I mentioned, Bruniquel, that site where they've arranged those rocks in a circle, that's 2 hours underground. You have to go far underground to find that location. So these Neanderthals they're exploring caves. They're not just living in the mouths of caves and in convenient chambers of caves. They are going deep underground to do exploration, which of course implies that they have a convenient source of fire to carry with them as light, torch, lamp, I don't know what, but they're able to do that. All right, so Neanderthals, as I say, home run for humanity. Now some of these guys are a little bit less clear. And here's the tricky part. Remember I said you could be incapacitated and still be the image of God, right? You may not have the intellectual capacity because of some brain damage. You might not have the same physical capacity because of maybe a birth defect or maybe an amputation or something like that. But you are still the image of God. And this is why it's important, because sometimes you have things where the 6 categories of evidences of the image of God, maybe they don't manifest themselves fully. And the best you can say about those individuals is, well, you know, I guess it depends on the quality of the evidence that you do have, and sometimes you don't have anything. And so you just sort of say, well, we have to solve this problem in another way. Homo erectus is where we're starting to see this. Homo erectus is known from sites around Eurasia and Africa. There are Homo erectus from especially East Africa, especially the Republic of Georgia, in the Caucasus region, and then farther east in China and Indonesia. We have the fire evidence is tricky. We have evidence of controlled fire that goes back quite a long ways. It's not clearly, it's hard to say that it's obviously Homo erectus. The place where you would find, say, a Homo erectus fossil and evidence of hearths, that's a little bit tricky. Gesher Bennett Yakov, we'll talk about this one again tomorrow. It's probably one of the best places that you'll find candidate hearths that could have been made by Homo erectus. But we don't have the fossils of the people at that site to say this is who made that fire. They are the right age, the right radiometric age to be Homo erectus, but we don't have the actual skeletal evidence that that's who was there. So it's a little, it could be, that could be them. They could have made that fire. Tools, I think, very clear, very sophisticated axes, hand axes, where they're chipping the stone on both sides, and they're forming it into like a teardrop shape with a sharp edge. They're re-sharpening it, so they become dull pretty quickly, and then they're chipping off a little bit more in order to sharpen. So use a pretty clear design mindset in order to make these things. They can see in their head, I want to make this shape. They're choosing rocks that help them make that shape. They're chipping off pieces that will get them to that shape. And it's clearly planned in advance and designed to be that way. They're not just whacking rocks together to make sharp flakes. Art, we have one shell from Indonesia with some really interesting scratch marks on it that look like he might have been doodling. Whoever made it might have been doodling. He makes some interesting, scratch marks that don't look like random. They don't look like random marks. They don't look like the kind of marks you would make to harvest the meat from the shell. The only thing I can describe it as, he's doodling. He's just sitting there with his stone tool, and he's just doodled some scratches into this shell. And we got one. And I wish we had more, because I think art would be a real cool thing to associate with these fossils. And it could be that there is more. It could be there's more still to be discovered in China or something like that. Care for wounded or elderly, I can't think of a single example where I could point to this. The fossil evidence for Homo erectus is less than it is for Neanderthals, so we don't know about that. We don't know about intentional burial. Most of what we found have been well, I wouldn't say catastrophic burial, but burial that's not obviously an intentional thing. Nariocotomy boy, for example, was found in a stream deposit, and his bones were sort of scattered over several square meters where they had apparently been pushed by the current of the stream. So probably not buried. The material that we find in the Republic of Georgia is found at the bottom of a stream bank as well, in a volcanic region where volcanoes were going off and burying the remains of these people in this stream bed. So it's not clear that any of these are intentionally laid to rest in any way that we would consider to be what we would think of as a burial. Now, dispersal, this was interesting. And I got to credit Marcus for digging this up. I don't know how he found this, but there is I think it's from the Russian Academy of Science, in the Russian language, which doesn't even use our alphabet. So how do you even figure out what this article is about? I don't know. But there is a report now of a recent Russian expedition to an island called Socotra. Socotra is, if you don't know Socotra, I totally understand because it's not well known. Socotra is an island that's off the Horn of Africa. It's off the coast of the Horn of Africa. It's in the territory of Yemen. Its nationality is Yemeni. It's a fairly large island, and it's a continental island. It's not got a volcano on it, so it's got continental deposition on it, sort of rock that you would associate with continents. But it's a good 50 miles at least, possibly more. I know it's more than 100 miles off Yemen, but it's a good 50 miles off the Horn of Africa. And out there, these Russian scientists found hand axes that you would associate with Homo erectus. And so think about this for a minute. If you were going to go to, say, the Channel Islands in California, right? Channel Islands are, they're a couple miles off the coast. On a clear day, you can stand on the shore, Ventura Beach, you can look out, and there they are. You can see them. And you can think, oh, I wonder what's out there. And if you were really enterprising, you could make, make a dugout canoe or whatever. You could get out there and do some exploring. But what possesses you to go out, just randomly out into the middle of the ocean, thinking, I'm going to go see what's out there, right? You don't know there's an island out there. You can't see it out there. But somehow people got out there and made these hand axes out on Socotra. Really curious. Now, again, this is a very preliminary research. We don't know if this is going to turn out to be the sort of stuff that's associated with Homo erectus or not. The jury's still out on that, but it's very interesting. Homo erectus is crossing ocean like that. That's incredible. That is not an animal thing. That is a human thing. That is human desire to explore. All right, another example, the hobbit from Indonesia. Now this one, I've just recently had to revise my assessment of this one because I've learned some things about where this was found. You might remember this from a couple of years ago. There's this short, maybe 3 foot tall adult woman skeleton found in a cave in Indonesia on the island of Flores. There was a long debate in the scientific literature about whether she was suffering from an abnormality and just normal Homo sapiens, or whether she was something evolutionarily different. She is an evolutionary branch of the family tree or whatever. And I think that debate is sort of, I don't know. I think there are still some holdouts who are stubbornly sticking to the idea that she's pathological in some way. Whereas I would say a lot of scientists have just agreed, she's an evolutionary, whatever, branch of our tree. Now, when she was reported, when her remains were reported, they also reported finding in their excavations evidence of fire in the form of at least one hearth, and then stone tools. Abundant stone tools were found in the cave as well. No evidence of art. She's the only, this cave is the only place where they found these skeletons, so there's no evidence of care for wounded or elderly. There's no idea whether she was intentionally buried there or not. And the fire and tools issue. This is what I've learned. There was an article that came out recently in a history of science journal describing this discovery from the Indonesian perspective, because the researchers who did the work the team was led by Australian researchers. From the Indonesian side of things, the Australians were not the first to dig in that cave. They called this skeleton LB1 after the name of the cave, Liang Bua. That's the cave, LB, and then 1 being the first skeleton. It's not the first skeleton. The Indonesians had recovered at least 13 skeletons from that same cave in the 80s, in the 1980s. Those results were never published. They exist only in some native Indonesian language as museum reports. So somewhere in Indonesia, there are these skeletons of these people, along with the Indonesian language reports. And so now I'm thinking, all right, well, if you found human beings, whatever those are, I don't know if they're Homo sapiens or if they're similar to the LB1 skeleton or not. But now I don't know who made those fires or who made those tools, right? If you've got a site, right, and you find 2 different skeletons there of potential people, who made the fire and who made the tools? Hard to say, right? You might be able to say, based on the layers in which you find them, oh, these sorts of tools are only found with these skeletons here, and these sorts of tools are found with these skeletons over here. And so maybe you can sort it out. But that's not been done yet. So I've gone literally from the last time I gave this several months ago to this talk. I've just had to say, well, actually, now we don't know. The best evidence we have of humanity for Floresiensis is the dispersal. Flores is on an island that can only be reached by crossing treacherous open ocean. So we have these evidences, and you can see, as you move across the chart, you get fewer clear evidences, more uncertainty, until you reach the last couple of rows of columns there where we don't know. We don't have those evidences, right? Or we can't tell. We got lots of stone tools in East Africa, but you got a lot of different things there that could have been making them. So it's hard to know which one was making this tool. It's difficult to know. So what do we do, right? What about the rest? And to do that then, I've sort of gone to the sort of second tier approach here, which would be to say, all right, well, if evolutionists make this one right here, if evolutionists make this tree using anatomical characteristics, the tree is basically designed, the program that makes evolutionary trees is designed to give you an evolutionary tree. It never tells you whether things should go on the same evolutionary tree or not. It just gives you an evolutionary tree. Well, what if I tried a different way altogether? What if I tried some methods of cluster analysis? And so that's what I've been doing. So here's an early example of this. The green dots on the bottom represent Australopithecus. The red dots on the left are members of Homo, which is our genus, and then the blue dots up there on the top right, that's Paranthropus. And the clustering is quite nice. I mean, you can see from this angle easily that there's a very clear separation between Paranthropus and everything else. Paranthropus is not like us. And I've tried the clustering several different ways. And so this diagram is impossible to read. Sorry about that. But the key thing to note here, the green guys represent, the green rows there represent things that are probably human. Blue rows represent things that are probably not human. And every column is a different way of trying to cluster, either by a different treatment of the data, different treatment of the anatomical characters, or a different mathematical clustering method altogether. And you can see every clustering method has come up with exactly the same answer, which is really cool. People who do cluster analysis love that. If you do a bunch of different ways and you always get the same answer, those clusters must be real. And here I've separated Homo from Australopithecus and Paranthropus, reliably and repeatably separating those out, which is pretty remarkable. So all of those missing links, right, that are supposed to connect humanity to apes, actually, no, not really. There's a pretty clear division between what is human and what is not human. And I've done this with more sophisticated sets of information using more fossils and more characteristics. It gets a little hairy when you do that. Obviously, anytime you increase the sample size, you're going to get a bit of random noise in your data. That always happens. And here we've got red guys on the right, which are Homo this time, and the green guys on the left are Australopithecus. And the clustering is remarkably consistent. It is not perfectly consistent anymore, but it is remarkably consistent. There is only the middle line there. You can see there is one line there where the first 8 columns are green, and then the last 8 columns look like they're kind of blue, and then a couple green. That's the Hobbit. The Hobbit is really weird. And I've examined the Hobbit, studied the Hobbit's anatomy now quite closely, trying to understand what's going on here, and I've come to the conclusion that this is not a statistical artifact. The Hobbit is genuinely weird. That's what we call it in science. The Hobbit is really weird. This isn't the results of mismeasuring things or not measuring things correctly. This is because the Hobbit's really strange. It doesn't, sometimes it clusters with the apes, sometimes it clusters with the humans. But it's the only one that does that. There's a couple of spots there where Australopithecus africanus show up in one of the clusters with human beings, but that's only 2 treatments, and they're statistically less quality than the ones where it does not. So, on the whole, you still have a clear separation between what is ape, Australopithecus in blue on the top, and what is human in green on the bottom. But you still have this weirdness of Floresiensis, the Hobbit, which I'm still not quite sure what to say about that. It's an odd one. It's an oddball. And I'm going to have to look more carefully at its anatomy to know. These results are published in this paper. It was published, I think, last year in a research journal. I have a new paper that I just got word yesterday has been accepted for the International Conference on Creationism this summer. Well, accepted pending revisions. But we'll get that done. That's fine. It'll be there. So there'll be new updates to this then this summer. So that leaves us with a humankind that looks something like this. And I've sort of changed the font there on these things. I want to emphasize that the top row, or the top set of fossils there in bold, Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, and Homo erectus, those are taxa that I'm very sure are human. They have the cultural evidence that I would associate with the image of God, and they always group together with Homo sapiens, us. And so I have no doubt in my mind that that Neanderthals and Erectus are human. The rest of the list there, I could take them or leave them. If I'm wrong about some of them, that's okay. Won't be the first time, and it won't be the last. The Hobbit, again, oh man, that thing has just become this weird thorn in my flesh. I don't know what to do with the Hobbit, but I'm going to figure it out, maybe, Lord willing. And then a couple of other things, and habilis and rudolfensis and sediba, these are fossils that are known from very little material. Right? Erectus we know from multiple countries and multiple sites. We've got lots of stone tools. We know a lot about Erectus. We know there are dozens of Neanderthal individual skeletons that we have. We've got hundreds of Neanderthal fossils from multiple sites across Europe and Asia. We know lots about Neanderthals. Homo habilis, I'm not even sure Homo habilis is a real thing. I know Homo habilis is a name that's been placed on a collection of fossils from East Africa, but I wouldn't bet on those being really all together as a coherent group that needs a name. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. That's one of the things I'm trying to look at right now. And I'm already discovering some of the fossils called habilis I'm really sure are not habilis. Rudolfensis is known from a couple of skulls. One that's mostly complete and a couple of skull fragments, and that's it. Sediba is only known from one site, 2 partial skeletons, so we've got a lot of skeletal evidence, but we don't have a lot of evidence of what it's like. We just have the one site. So, yeah, are you sure? Sure. Sure, why not? I wouldn't take a bullet for it, but sure. Now, you might be thinking, well, no, you're probably not thinking this, because I haven't told you this yet, but everything that I've done with all that cluster analysis is only based on skulls, only based on teeth and skulls. And you know what? We're more than just skulls. There's this whole other thing below the skull that's really important to keep the skull happy and fed and nourished and so forth. And so what about arms and legs and hands and feet and all that stuff? Well, that's what I'm going to be talking about at the ICC this summer. So if you're going to ICC, come to my talk and I'll tell you all about what the skeleton has to say about these sorts of things and how it confirms and modifies some of my previous findings. And you might also be wondering, well, how old is Adam anyway, right? So this relates to a related question, of course, and that is the timing of all this stuff. How do we understand these things from the perspective of the conventional dates, right? Homo erectus, the Gesher-Bennett-Yakov site, that's said to be about 700,000 years old. I don't think the Earth is that old. So how is it that this site could be 700,000 years old? How do we fit these fossils into our biblical framework of history? That's a subject I'm going to talk about tomorrow when we talk about cavemen in the Holy Land. But I would basically understand the situation like this. There was a time when Adam and Eve were the only people alive, and from them then sprung all of these other individuals, all these other individual forms of humanity, if you will. Much like at one time, there was Noah and his family, and now we have all of the different here in the world, and different biological variations that we see among different people groups. And of course, there are still more lingering questions. What about the human genome? People always want me to talk about the human genome. I do fossils now, I'm sorry. You'll have to talk to genome people. I used to be a genome person. I'm really kind of out of that for now. What about the archaeology? This is my major area of interest right now, is trying to sort out how do we fit all of these hominin fossils and these biological forms of humanity into our understanding of the development of human culture. What is this? What do these people tell us about the beginning of culture as we have it in the Middle East? How does it all fit together? And of course, there's always the looming excitement of the next fossil discovery. I know a lot of paleoanthropologists are now blogging and YouTubing about their digs, so you can actually find out who's been doing what and what they found. You can't find out the details, but they'll tell you, we found a skull, we found a pelvis, we found whatever. They might even show you a picture of it, but they won't tell you what it is, of course. So there are still, I know there are at least 2 big fossil discoveries coming up that have yet to be described. And maybe they will change our picture of everything. I don't know. I doubt it. I doubt very much that we're going to have major changes in most of my work, because I think it's pretty robust. But I suppose it's possible that 1 or 2 of those things, like I said, habilis, I don't know about habilis. It might turn out to be something really weird, just like Floresiensis, but that's okay. All right, so let's wrap this up. Check out more information about Core Academy of Science. You can go to coresci.org/connect. That'll take you to lists of links that will include our social media. You can sign up for our electronic newsletter. You can also go back to the round table next to the skeletons back there. There are little yellow cards. If you fill that out, we'll put you on our mailing list as well. Let you know about what we're doing, where I'm speaking, the kind of research projects that we're working on, what the latest events are. And then if you're really into the kind of work that I do and you're a glutton for punishment, you want to sign up for my Patreon, because that's where I put all of my research notes. And if you're thinking, ooh, that sounds really interesting. No, it's not. It's where I put all of my research notes, right? So if you like to read long lists of numbers and random ramblings about what I think about this paper that I just read, that's the place to go. But I'll tell you, that is the place where you will find out exactly what I've been doing and the research work that I've been doing. So if you're really interested in that sort of thing, that is definitely something. It's cheap. What is it, $4 a month? I don't even know, $4 or $5, something. $3 a month. Okay, it's $3 a month. That's dirt cheap. That's less than Disney Plus, so I'm worth more than Disney Plus, surely. Okay, so thank you very much, and I guess that's done. We're going to do Q&A tomorrow. No questions now. We'll do that later, and I'm turning it over to you, I guess. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Wood. Hold up. So you ended a few minutes early, so we are encouraging folks to write in questions for tomorrow, but we probably have time to take 1 or 2, if you're all right with that, since we're ending a little early here this session. So we'll take 1, maybe 2 audience questions if there are any. Yeah, why don't you come up, if you don't mind, or yeah. Just want to make sure that folks on the live stream can hear.
So you mentioned
Sure. Hold up, sir, sorry. Give you the mic.
Dr. Wood, you mentioned a circle of stone of stalagmites, Neanderthals burning something in a ritual, perhaps.
Yeah.
What was the location of that place?
I'm sorry?
What was the location?
The location is a place called Bruniquel, Bruniquel, Bruniquel Cave, and that's, that's where that was. And remember, ritual here, I was talking to an archaeologist. We were going through this really interesting Native American site in Tennessee, and I was talking to this archaeologist friend, and I said, now, when you say ritual, that doesn't mean necessarily a church service, right? And he says, that's right. I said, the Super Bowl is a ritual, like, I don't know, Taylor Swift concert. That's a ritual. Yeah, that's definitely a ritual. So that circle of stones, now that's where the teenage Neanderthals could have snuck off to smoke their weed or something, for all I know. That would be a ritual. I think sometimes when we say, this is used for ritual purposes, we think, ooh, some really amazing thing going on. It may not be some amazing thing. It could be some annoying thing. That why are those kids always sneaking off underground? Where have you been? We've been out hunting deer, and you're out doing whatever. That could have been something. It could have been something as simple as that. Sometimes ritual, we need to desacralize what a ritual is. It could be something simple.
So you made a distinction at the beginning about there must be some physical aspect to the image of God.
Right.
Yet, curiously, your 6 things to
Yes,
identify the image of God are all behavioral.
Correct.
So where do you see this going?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Right. So what we know about the image of God. One of the things God is making us the image to do certain things, right? To have dominion. That's one of the first things that he talks about in conjunction with the image of God. And then later you see he's put into the garden to keep it, right? In the same way, it's the same terminology as keeping the commandments, which I think is really interesting. So there's an aspect of treasuring, there's an aspect of caring for, there's an aspect of obedience even, obeying the garden, which I'm not even sure how that works. So in those dimensions of the image, I can translate that into things I could find in the fossil record. And I can imagine being really lazy and sloppy and saying, okay, well, this part of the brain is for talking, or this part of the brain is for reasoning. And so if this fossil has this part of the brain, then it has the image of God. And if it doesn't have that, then it doesn't have the image of God. And I think a lot about the resiliency of humanity to be able to do amazing things, even in disability. The last time the Olympics were on, which was a couple years ago, my wife and I went ahead and watched some of the Paralympics after that. And I have to tell you, some of those athletes are astonishing. We watched a swimmer, right? There's the swimming race, right? With these people who have had amputations, or they did not develop limbs at all, and they're swimming. Our attention was absolutely riveted to a woman who had no arms, who was swimming only by kicking, and her body was just going up and down. She was in last place, but it was astonishing to watch her do this. We watched another game that has no counterpart in the regular Olympics. Goal ball, that's what it's called. It's called goal ball, right? It's played on a court where you have 2 teams, and there's this massive goal that goes across the entire court, and they basically roll a ball back and forth and try to get it into the goal. And the opposite team is their job is obviously to stop the ball from going in the goal. And the trick is everybody's blind, and the ball has a jingle bell in it. And I'm sitting here watching this, and I'm just absolutely astonished that it's very competitive. They can figure out where that ball is going. So obviously the trick is for the guy who's going to roll the ball to try to figure out, how am I going to get it in there and get it going really fast so they can get it by the defense. But the defense is really good. They can kick that ball out of the way or hit that ball out of the way. They're amazing. And I just think to myself, okay, humanity is amazing in its ability to overcome these deficiencies. We think that, we able-bodied people tend to look down on the disabled and think, oh, how pitiful, you must be so miserable. They're quite happy, and they're just different. And I think to myself, okay, So if I say this part of the brain is the image of God, is it possible that someone could not have that part of the brain and still be the image of God and still overcome not having that part of the brain? And I think, well, yeah, all the things that I've seen in my lifetime, and the more I think about the disabled community and the astonishing things that they can accomplish, the more I think, yeah, I have no idea what it is to be physically human. I think I do, right? And I could just say, oh, this is the image of God in the brain. No, I think God is laughing at me. I think probably what it is that there is a, this is kind of where I'm going with this, there's probably a whole massive range of physical characteristics. If you have enough of those, then you are the image of God. So if you lose a couple, you gain a couple more over here. And so you make up for those deficiencies in some way. That's the best I've got. Because I haven't thought about this a lot. I've only, because I used to hear the image of God as physical, and I would think of sort of the non-Christian scoffing idea that the ancients thought gods looked like us. So that literally the body, the human body, is a reflection of what God's body, physical body, looks like. And obviously that's pagan and silly, and that's not right. But there is this other aspect that, yeah, there is a physical dimension to the image of God. I have no idea what it is. And I don't know how to go about figuring it out without making a fool of myself. Okay.
I have one question for you.
Oh, you have
just to maybe kind of help some of the dates that you were giving have a little more significance. What will be the oldest Homo erectus specimen that we know of, conventionally speaking?
Yeah, about 1.8 million.
1.8 million. What about Neanderthal? How far back does that go?
Well, depends on who you ask.
Okay.
Typically, you'll hear 350,000. If you accept certain middle Pleistocene forms that sometimes are called Homo heidelbergensis, those might be Neanderthal as well. That pushes it back to 600,000.
Okay.
So it's just sort of dependent on how you want to define Neanderthal.
So Neanderthal, maybe 300, 600,000. Erectus, 1.8 million.
Yeah.
And the reason why I want to mention that is we see these human characteristics that you're measuring here. And obviously we don't accept those absolute dates as young Earth creationists, but many of our old Earth creationist friends who would accept those dates, they would want to place Adam maybe, 15 to 40,000 years back. I'm not sure how far back they're willing to go. But you start to run into a problem, right? Because no one's putting Adam back 1.8 million years ago.
Correct. They're wanting to put Adam at the base of Homo sapiens.
Exactly.
And some of them are wanting to put Adam recently in the stream of Homo sapiens. So I was at a meeting with some theistic evolutionists earlier this year who were getting very excited about the idea that there could have been biological Homo sapiens that were cultured and reasoning and thoughtful and skilled hunters, all the biological, cultural signs of Homo sapiens that are not made in the image of God and are not actually human. That humanity was only a certain tribe that then became the dominant form of Homo sapiens and left behind no clear archaeological or biological record of that transformation. I don't even know what to say about that. So yes, people who are looking for the historical Adam at the base of Homo sapiens, I think it's just not possible that it's there. Not and have any biblically sensible, consistent concept of what the image of God actually is.
And so you're forced then, as an old Earth creationist, you would be forced to say there are these creatures that exhibit characteristics that we would say are very human-like,
yes,
but they have to be animals.
Yes.
And they're forced into that problem because of their old Earth mindset.
You could alternatively be stubborn and say, okay, well, Adam must have lived 800,000, 700,000 years ago, at the dawn of whatever you think the sophisticated archaeological evidence is that makes you think the image of God exists.
Right.
At which point you have to wonder, well, how did we remember all that to write it down in the Bronze Age 700,000 years later? I don't know how that works. So yeah, there's a lot of weird stuff. But yes, the most common idea is that things like Neanderthals are not human at all. They're beasts of the field, or they're beasts of some kind, which I find really upsetting. But
Well, thank you again, Dr. Wood. We are now going to be in a break.